Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around is my review of the 1985 dark comic thriller Into the Night, starring Jeff Goldblum, Michelle Pfeiffer, and directed by John Landis. Now, this is one of those films that fell in between the cracks. It didn't do well when it came out. In fact, it was probably the first financial flop of John Landis's career. And it's one of those movies that's, for the most part, forgotten about. And on one hand, I understand why. Because at best, this film is just mediocre and a time waster. So I can understand why this is forgotten about by a lot of people and by a lot of critics. Especially since a much better version of this kind of story came out the same year in Martin Scorsese's After Hours. But it's still a film that has some things going for it. And it's one of those movies that I wanted to love. I wanted to really like more than I did. But it just doesn't pan out. And that's why it's just such a frustrating film. Because there are elements here that are incredible. I mean, Jeff Goldblum and Michelle Pfeiffer, they are an amazing pair. They have great chemistry. They carry the film on their shoulders. They try their best to carry it farther than it ultimately does. So you can't blame them. In fact, you just feel bad for them because they were just saddled with such a mediocre film. And you have things that really should make this a hit. You've got John Landis, who's a capable and solid director. You've got some other really talented members in the cast for your supporting roles. So you've got guys like David Bowie and Bruce McGill. You've got a really nice score by Ira Newborn, inspired by and influenced directly by B.B. King, who also did songs for the soundtrack. Some nice cinematography. You have a screenplay that does a great job setting things up and has a genuinely intriguing hook and a nice idea, but it just doesn't come together. And I think the main reason for that is John Landis. So the film, speaking of John Landis, is directed by Landis, and Landis to me is the film's biggest flaw. He was the wrong guy to direct this movie. I don't think his heart was necessarily in this film. I think he only did it for the money and because it's another project for him to do, to take his mind off of things, especially when it comes to what happened on the set of The Twilight Zone. And on top of that, I just don't think his style was the right fit for the screenplay by Ron Koslow. John Landis is a more zany kind of filmmaker. And his zany approach to comedy works well in films that take place in some kind of pseudo hyper reality, like An American Werewolf in London, or Animal House, or The Blues Brothers. It doesn't really work that well in a film like this that is darker and grittier and has more of an edge to it. And Landis is the reason why the tone is so all over the place in this movie. Why I can't seem to find the right gear. It's his fault. It's not necessarily the script because it was his input that changed things. So if you had a different director, you wouldn't have that going on. You wouldn't have the tonal shifts that are distracting and irritating, where you have these Middle Eastern thugs, these gangsters who are going around acting like the Keystone Cops or the Three Stooges and bumbling and fumbling, but then also strangling some woman at the beach and viciously murdering people and animals. It doesn't work. You can't have that kind of tone and have a film actually be successful overall because it's just too tonally inconsistent. And John Landis is the guy to blame for that. He's the blame for the tone visually. He's the guy to blame for the tone when it comes to the storytelling and when it comes to the humor. And it's not like his direction is bad. See, that's the thing. When it comes to a technical level, his direction is fine. It's actually quite good. The film has a nice look to it. He's showcasing some genuine talent behind the camera, like he always does, when it comes to the movement of the camera, when it comes to pans, when it comes to different angles, when it comes to working with light and shadow, and all these other elements and difficulties that a filmmaker might run into while shooting a film. He handles it masterfully. I mean, there was even a moment where he had to think on his feet and shoot a scene that was supposed to take place in traffic without the required amount of extras. And he made it look like it was easy. So he's a very skilled, competent director. This film is no exception. I mean, it's got some really nice looking shots in it, especially shots that take place at dusk or in between night and day, where you have that haze and the lights from the street lights and all of these other things. But he just is not the right guy to do this story. That's the problem. Sometimes you have a director who's talented, who's capable of doing pretty much everything else that you want from a director, but they're still just not the right fit. And I feel that John Landis was that guy. If this was more of a fantasy, if this was more of an instance of a film that took place more in a hyper reality like he's accustomed to, that would be one thing. But it's not. Other than some sequences that take place in Hollywood, it doesn't really have that going on. So it's a much more serious, straightforward kind of comic drama thriller. And John Landis is just not the right guy to do that kind of film. And that's what makes you feel bad about the script by Ron Kozlow, because there's all the nuts and bolts that you need for a successful quality machine when it comes to a movie. You have a good setup. You have characters that you are engaged with and you care about in Diana and Ed. The setup for Ed is relatable and strong. You feel so much for this guy. He's dealing with a serious rut in his life that a lot of people can relate to. I mean, the whole idea of just not being able to sleep or get a good night sleep for days is something that pretty much anyone can relate to. And then on top of that, you have issues at home with your wife, with your girlfriend, as well as work, because he's not able to really be as sharp as he wants to at work because of all this stress that's making it so he can't sleep. So then that's causing other parts of his life to start to slip. And so you really do relate to the guy. And then you relate to him even more when you find out that his wife is cheating on him. I mean, the guy just wants a good night's rest. He just wants to rest his eyes and get some good sleep. He gets sent home early from work, and he's going to do just that. And he just finds out that his wife is banging some other guy. So, I mean, yeah, you feel so much for Ed. And that's one instance where I got to give John Landis some credit, is the scene where he finds out that his wife is cheating on him. It's done in a very unique fashion, if you ask me, because you don't see the actual act. Ed Oken just walks up to one of the windows in his house. I think on the side of his house. I think the window to his bedroom, and he just stands outside and hears his wife fucking another guy, and it's all, there's no music. It's a very awkward and unsettling kind of shot because it's done in a way that really does put you in his shoes. And then the only time you ever see the act of sex, The moment when she cheats on Ed is when he's having a nightmare, or like one of those moments where he nods off and has a quick little flash of what he thinks might have happened, and that's it. So that was a nice creative choice. But I don't know if that really was John Landis. That might have been Ron Kozlow because he's the writer. He might have blocked the scene that way. Um, and it just starts out so well. Gets you invested in the character, gets you invested in the story, because you have Diana who literally falls right into Ed's lap, and now they're on the run from these Middle Eastern thugs who want Diana and want these emeralds that she stole from them. And I don't think she actually stole directly from them, but stole from someone else in the country in the Middle East. And so it's a great setup, but they don't do that much with it. Other than a few chuckle-worthy moments where it's trying to satirize Hollywood and how ridiculous Hollywood is. It doesn't do a lot with its concept and with the pieces that were there at the start. It just kind of weaves around and doesn't really go in a straight line, and it just doesn't really find its footing. I mean, even the climax, as bloody and as violent as it is, it feels rather clunky and doesn't really feel like anything that leaves a significant impact. There's all these scenes of violence and chases and all this other stuff, and it doesn't really feel like it has the stakes that it really needs. And the big reason for that is John Landis' decision to make the villains into a joke. They're jokes. Sorry, when you have villains that are already paper thin when it comes to their depth, when it comes to their characterization, and you have them be a bunch of bumbling fools, you have put the film at a serious disadvantage. Because now you don't have villains that match the strength of your heroes. And when you have films that rely upon good antagonists for your protagonists, like this film does, it's very hard for a film to overcome that. And most of the time it doesn't. And Into the Night is no exception to that, in my opinion. It doesn't overcome it. It had a chance to, because the scenes with David Bowie and his character are a revelation compared to anything else. And he's in it for like 5 minutes. He's an intimidating, creepy presence. And then he just essentially gets killed off screen and you never see him again. And you're just left with the bumbling thugs and more bumblers and their supposedly intimidating boss in this female mob boss kind of archetype, even though she's not really a mob boss, but she might as well be. Shaheen. Like, you have all these characters talking about how she's dangerous and you shouldn't cross her. And then when you see Shaheen, I mean, there's nothing to this character. She has all the intimidating presence of your average stern school teacher. Nothing special. Nothing special at all. So yeah, just the villains just really hurt this film because they are never taken seriously. And then you have moments in the end where it's supposed to be taken seriously, and one of the villains actually shoots themselves, and it's bloody. Michelle Pfeiffer's character, Diana's got blood all over her face. Prior to that, Jeff Goldblum's talking about how I can't sleep, and blah blah blah. It's supposed to be some big moment for his character, and it just falls flat. Falls flatter than a pancake on a griddle because of the fact that it just doesn't feel like these pieces fit. And I don't think it's really necessarily the writer that's to blame. You got the elements that you need. It just doesn't really work because of the tone. And also because it's trying to be a comedy at times, but the comedy for the most part is not funny. And other than maybe a few scenes with Ed, who's on the movie set and is oblivious and is also really exhausted and tired, so he thinks he's leaning up against a brick wall, and then it turns out to be fake, and then he falls through it. Other than some moments like that, and the moments where you're like, "Hey, I know that guy. Oh, hey, it's Jim Henson on the phone." There's not really a lot of intrigue or excitement to be had. And even the action sequences, I mean, John Landis can do action. I mean, look at the chases in the Blues Brothers. He's a guy who can actually shoot action. The action in this is lethargic. There's a car chase in a parking garage that is just painfully slow and dull. They just go around in a circle in the garage. That's really all they do. There's the shootout at the end at the airport where it tries to be exciting or build any suspense, but by that point the film has just run out of steam. It doesn't help either that the movie is too long. And then maybe that is something that the writer can share some blame for. Maybe there's some subplots, some things that could have been cut out or cut down. Um, but it's a shame because the characters of Ed and Diana are really strong. And they make quite the pair, and it's a different kind of pair than you're used to. And you just want them to be a part of a better film, a better adventure, a better ride. Because this ride is just far too bumpy and just not that memorable of an experience. And speaking of Ed and Diana, get to the cast. I mean, Jeff Goldblum in one of his first big starring roles, I thought he did a great job. You sympathize with him. He had a certain wry sense of humor that you would really see later on in a lot of the other films that he would star in. He was a quirky casting choice, and it panned out. I think it worked well. And then you have Michelle Pfeiffer, who's just drop dead gorgeous in this film. You can't take your eyes off her. She's just mesmerizing in every scene that she's in, and has really good chemistry with Jeff Goldblum and pretty much anyone else in the film. Even the cinematographer, who just shoots her in a way that just makes your jaw drop in some scenes. And you have members of the supporting cast that are very game as well and deliver good performances. David Bowie, I honestly think it's one of his best acting roles as Colin Morris, and he's only in it for like 5 minutes. He should have been the main villain. He should have been the main villain. He was strong enough. He should have had more screen time. He should have been the main villain. Take out the bullshit with the French guy. Who gives a fuck? I know it's a guy, an actor. I think it might be he might be a director actually. Roger Vadim. Yeah, he's the director of Barbarella. Take him out. Who gives a shit about that subplot? Focus more on David Bowie, his character. Have him somehow become the main villain. And then you're kind of off to the races. Or if you really want to do something different, take Dan Aykroyd, who was in this film as one of Jeff Goldblum's friends at work. Have him be the villain. Then the goofy, silly Keystone Cops thugs might actually work if you have a Dan Aykroyd character who's playing it like he's Erwin Mainway from SNL, or he's just some kind of mustache twirling villain who's got a sadistic mean streak. Like that actually might work with Dan Aykroyd. Maybe the tone might work better because then the villain would match. But Shaheen doesn't match the tone of her henchmen, so it doesn't work. So if you had something like that in terms of an out of the box casting choice, then maybe that might work a lot better than it ultimately did. Clu Gulager was also quite noteworthy as one of the federal agents. Um, Irene Papas was just completely 100% one note, nothing when it comes to her screen presence as Shaheen. And I don't know if that's really her fault. That might be one of the problems with the script. Might be a John Landis thing. I don't know. Catherine Harold had a lot of personality and spunk and charisma as Christie. Um, it was really quite tragic and sad what happened to her. It was a very brutal and like violent scene in the film when she gets strangled to death on the beach. And it's just one of many scenes that just don't stand up very well. Like they just stand out too much. They don't blend in with the rest of the film. Richard Farnsworth, he was fine as Jack Caper, the old guy who had Diana as his mistress. Bruce McGill was fun to see him in a different kind of role as honestly probably one of the first gay characters in a somewhat mainstream film like this. Like they don't go all out and have him making out with his boyfriend or anything or showing their sexuality in that regard, but they also are not trying to hide it. So that's a good step forward in terms of representation, even back here, in this time period in the mid '80s, to have Bruce McGill's character, who is the brother of Diana, be an openly gay Elvis impersonator. Like that's a different approach, and it's handled in a way that feels respectful and not cheap. So I got to give them a lot of credit for that in terms of the representation of the character. Even though he's kind of an asshole, but you know, it's he's not an asshole because he's gay. He's just an asshole who also is gay. Um, and then you have like all of these other cameo appearances by other directors like Paul Bartel, David Cronenberg, Rick Baker, who's completely unrecognizable as a drug dealer in the film, Lawrence Kasdan, Jim Henson, Amy Heckerling. I know a lot of critics criticized the film for having all of these cameos. They were like, "Oh, there's just too many cameos." But most of them I didn't even fucking recognize other than like a handful. So there's a ton more cameos that I didn't even fucking think about or recognize because these are actors and directors that pretty much only insiders in Hollywood would really be like, "Oh my god, it's that guy." It's like, I don't know who that. Oh, that was somebody special? I recognize Jake Steinfeld, the guy for the star of Home Sweet Home, more than I did Colin Higgins or Jonathan Lynn. The only ones I really recognized was David Cronenberg, Jim Henson, what's his name from yeah, Paul Bartel, who did Eating Raoul. That's really only cameo roles that really caught my eye. And speaking of catching my eye, the cinematography by Robert Painter is gorgeous. It's a great looking film. I love the way the film looks. Um, it's just a shame that the writing, well, not necessarily the writing, but some of the writing is not up to par. But it's just a shame that there's so many elements that just don't work. It's a great looking film, but you need more than good looking visuals to make a good film or a satisfying film overall. The film features some good editing too by Malcolm Campbell. I particularly thought the way that the scene was edited at the hotel that had all these different televisions showing, um, I think it's Frankenstein and the Wolfman, or some kind of, it's an Abbott and Costello film. I think it's like Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman or something. I don't remember exactly which one it was because I am not really that familiar with Abbott and Costello movies, so I might have butchered the title there, and I apologize. But in that scene, there's some nice editing because it appears as if it's almost in one shot, and I don't think it was. I think a lot of that was just clever editing. And there's a few other sequences where the editing really does punch the film up a little bit. And I really legitimately liked the score by Ira Newborn. I thought he did a great job. It's a shame the score is not officially available anywhere. Uh, yes, there were some moments where the score was a little tonally inconsistent, which is the theme of the film, so it kind of fits. But for the most part, though, I did like the score, and I really liked the original songs by B.B. King, especially the main titled track, Into the Night. Very catchy track. Really immediately stood out to me in a good way when the film started, when you had the opening credits with that song. And it's one of those movies that, like I said, it's been in the film. You are rooting for it because it's relatively obscure. It's relatively an unknown film. It's probably arguably the most forgotten film in John Landis's filmography, other than maybe something like Dying to Get Rich. But as bad as this is, at times it's a million times better than that movie because this at least has a budget, at least has good performances by quality actors who don't seem like they're embarrassing themselves. Um, but it's one of those movies that just doesn't click. It just does not click. And that's due to a varying degree of factors. But the main one for me is still John Landis. I think he was just the wrong guy to direct this movie. Um, why else would you explain him inserting himself into the film as one of the villains? Like he said in an interview, well, I did it in order to get the other actors who I cast as the thugs to actually act or feel comfortable acting. They seemed to be delivering some good performances when I was doing scenes with them, so I decided to just be in the film as a mute thug. And I'm like, there isn't another way you could get them to act better? Aren't you the director? Isn't that what a director's supposed to do? A good director is supposed to make things work and not have to do shit like that, which comes across as incredibly narcissistic. You didn't need to be in this movie. Every scene that he was in was a distraction. It didn't help that the film already had like a buttload of cameos. Then you put yourself in into the movie. It's not like you added anything. I would say it was more entertaining watching the interview with John Landis on this Blu-ray when it comes to the bulk of this film. Because the interview was only like 20 something minutes. This movie's almost 2 hours, which is way too goddamn long. The film drags way too much as a result. The interview was only 20 minutes and it was entertaining. The guy might be kind of a scumbag, but he does an entertaining interview. He's talking about how he initially wanted Jack Nicholson for the Ed role, and he went up to Jack Nicholson's home in Aspen, Colorado, and he thought it was promising that Jack might do it because Jack asked him to go all that way, and he did so in the middle of a fucking blizzard, and Jack turned him down. He went through all that trouble, went through a goddamn blizzard in a private plane, rented a car, drove through the blizzard to Jack's home in Aspen, Colorado, only for Jack Nicholson to tell him, it's a good script, but I'm not going to do it. Because Ed doesn't solve the problem himself. I can't be the guy who doesn't solve the problem. I was just like, oh my god, what a fucking troll. Um, and then he shared some other stories. He wanted Gene Hackman next. He even got Gene Hackman to do the film, but the studio was like, Gene Hackman's over. Nobody wants to see Gene Hackman. So Gene Hackman was dropped. As much as I love Gene Hackman, I don't think he really would have fit with the film. Maybe if they changed the casting around and it was an older woman who was also on the run, that might have worked okay. But I just don't see Gene Hackman working well in the role of Ed. This guy who can't sleep and is stuck at a dead end job. But then again, I didn't see Michael Douglas pulling off his role in Falling Down either. So Gene Hackman, for all I know, the professional that he is, he could have nailed it. And it would have been interesting. I will admit, it would have been interesting to have seen Gene Hackman in this film. But instead, they went for a younger guy. They tried to get Tom Berenger, but Tom Berenger was busy. Then they went down the list of actors from the movie The Big Chill, and they tried to get Kevin Kline, and he declined. And then they were looked at Jeff Goldblum, and the rest is history. Got him on board. Michelle Pfeiffer wasn't even necessarily supposed to be Diana. It was going to be Jamie Lee Curtis. But Jamie Lee Curtis dropped out to do Perfect because she was going to get paid a shit ton of money to do that movie. So John Landis and the producers had to kind of scramble and get Michelle Pfeiffer. And he was leery about her. He didn't even want to cast her initially because she was the only thing he remembered her from was that short-lived Animal House spin-off TV show Delta House. And her agent just kept hounding him and just give her a chance. Just come on, just let Michelle read. And you should see Scarface. And John saw Scarface and was like she was good in it, but that's not the kind of character I want for Diana. I want her to be more healthy and not as thin. And that bit was like, John, why are you making assumptions like that? You know, Michelle Pfeiffer is an actress. She probably lost weight for that role. Why would you think that she would just be that unhealthy now after like a year? I don't understand. So he finally relented. Michelle did a reading. The rest is history. She was great. He gave her the role. And yeah, like that was pretty entertaining. There wasn't a lot of tonal shifts in that interview. And there was an interview with Jeff Goldblum as well, but it was probably as disappointing as the overall film itself because of the fact that it was so unfocused. It's ironic, really, that his interview is so unfocused and the film itself, one of its main issues is how it's not focused enough. And Jeff Goldblum's just all over the place. You could tell the editors had to edit shit out because he went off topic. I love Jeff Goldblum, but man, he just rambles and it's just nonsense. And he's just spending most of the interview talking about, well, if I did the movie now, I would play this scene differently, and I would be better, and I didn't have confidence in myself, and it was just like, can you just talk about the movie? I don't want to hear about you talking about what you could have done or what you would do now with the role. I don't give a shit about that, Jeff. Sorry. I respect you, and I really admire your work, but what the fuck, Jeff? That has nothing to do with anything. The best part of the interview, the only part that was even worth the shit is when he's talking about playing card games with Michelle Pfeiffer uh, during downtime on the set. That's it. Everything else was really frustrating because he just couldn't. He was saying things like I can't remember or whatever. Like he just talking about nonsense and just bullshitting for 20 minutes. And the rest of the features, nah, not much. I mean, you've got a documentary, BB King Into the Night. You've got the trailer. I don't know why you don't have the music video. There are clips from the music video in the interviews, but there's no music video for BB King's song, which was a crazy music video. It had Michelle Pfeiffer, Jeff Goldblum. You had cameos by Steve Martin and a few others. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the film Into the Night. I probably talked about it at more in length than anyone else on here. But it's just one of those movies that, at the end of the day, I liked it okay. I thought it was decent, but it could have been great. And it just had the wrong captain of the ship. It had the wrong person who was giving the directions, who was behind the camera. And as a result, the film just suffers greatly. It never really gets above middling status. And it's a shame. It really is. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Into the Night. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.